And I am going to stop my video just to make it a little bit smoother. So we're excited that we're going to be able to come up to Michigan next week to present to you a co-requisite workshop. And we won't only be looking at co-requisite structures, we're also going to share some accelerated models because I know in Michigan you're doing different things. We have actually just been on a tour around Texas. Legislation in Texas mandated co-requisites. So we just finished 4 workshops around the state of Texas and all the regions. And we've also just recently, in August, we went out to the California State University system. Their chancellor basically put forth an executive order telling all institutions that they must implement CoReqs by fall of 2018. And so we were there to support that work as well. So you're in a unique situation. You're kind of ahead of the game where nobody's mandating you're doing this. You're doing this because you're looking for structures that are going to support your students. So our webinar outcomes, we're going to understand what the mission of the Dana Center is and our role in this work. I'm going to share with you some successful models, and we're going to foster some collaboration and hopefully surface some questions that are going to come up. So this webinar is going to be somewhat interactive too, so you have your chat box. So you can go ahead and type in questions in the chat box as we're going. And then you can also, if you have like pen and paper to jot down any ideas, and there's going to be times where we can mute, unmute, and we can actually listen to each other. And again, like I said, with your video, if you want to show your video, you can click on the video down there next to the mute and unmute. So the Dana Center's mission is that all students, regardless of college readiness, have equitable access to a rigorous mathematics pathway that's aligned to their future aspirations, thus propelling them to upward and social economic mobility. Our focus on the higher ed team is to improve this post-secondary success and completion through our Math Pathways work. So we support states and systems and institutions as they implement and scale math pathways, which often includes co-requisites and course redesign. So we want to help students become prepared, enabled, and we want to support them as mathematical learners. Our work kind of is centered around this diagram. As we're doing this work, we always need to start with the students. What is best for the students? What do the students need? And who are the people on the ground actually doing a majority of the work in the classroom with the students? The faculty. We often see pilots, faculty doing some great things in the classroom, and maybe some pilots happening here and there, but without the support of their administrators, oftentimes those pilots don't go very far. So good things are happening. So as we're looking at this work, it needs to be faculty driven, but then it needs to be the administrative team needs to support the work, and it needs to be policy enabled and then culturally reinforced. So for this work to be successful, again, we have to, and be able to scale, we have to have all these pieces in mind. I just want to do this seems kind of silly to do this here, but just a quick summary of what a math pathway is, because when we do workshops and stuff around the United States, people have different terminology of what a math pathway is. So a mathematics pathway is a mathematics course or sequence of courses that students take to meet the requirements of their program of study. So again, it's not just one single course. It's not a single developmental course. It's not a single gateway course. It doesn't stop when they finish a gateway course if they need calculus or above. So it's the entire sequence that the students need, not just one course. So we want to just kind of make sure we have some similar terminology here. And our principles that we work with are centered around these 4 statements here. So the structures are that the students enter directly into a mathematics pathway, regardless, again, of their college readiness, that's aligned to their program of study. So the mathematics courses they're taking, are they relevant to what they're actually doing? And then we also seen that for successful programs of math pathways, students complete their first college level math requirement in their first year of college. We often see students, how many of your students wait till the very end when they're about to graduate and go take their math course? So we see that that's a hindrance in the success of the students. So we want them to take their first college level math requirement during their first year of college. And oftentimes it's the first semester with the co-requisite structures. So these first two principles, they're centered more around your policy and your structure at your college. And then the second two principles, these are centered more around the student experience and in the classroom and the institutional level. So principle 3 is how do we support students within a classroom and within a campus? We are trying to create a coherence in how we support the students as learners. And if you notice, it says aligned across the institution. So where does advising come into play? Where do your tutoring services come into play? So these are the strategies to support the students. And then instruction incorporates evidence-based curriculum and pedagogy. So this work is constantly ongoing, and you're always looking to improve this. So these principles, these are our guiding principles, but institutions and states and systems in which we work, you decide how you're going to implement these principles. So this is not just a one-size-fits-all. You're working with what's going to happen on your campus in your context. Now, for this particular workshop, we're going to be looking at, briefly at a few of the other things, but our focus is more around principle 2. So we want students to complete that first college level math in the first year of college. So what does that mean? I know from the institution that I came from, we used to have a pre-algebra, elementary algebra, an intermediate algebra, and then you took your college level course. Well, that's a 2-year sequence, basically. So your traditional sequence of courses is no longer going to fit within the first year of college. So that redesign needs to happen, which means that you're reevaluating the way that you've always done things, or that some of you have already moved towards this goal. And at the workshop, we're going to rely on you to share what you're doing, and your colleagues are going to be able to connect with you to talk about what's working and what's not working on your campus. So our role, again, we're not here to tell you what to do. We're going to provide you with data for successful programs. We're going to support some planning. So you're going to come to the workshop. It's not about a workshop where you're going to come listen to us talk the whole time. We're going to facilitate structured discussions among your campus teams where you're going to do some hardcore planning. And then, of course, it's not all going to be done. You're going to need to go back to your campus and do more. You're going to have chances to have that cross-institutional learning and collaboration. And we're going to, of course, surface any questions and concerns that you may have. So our objective is to support your planning, providing information, tools, and resources from programs and structures so that you have team time to discuss and plan. Now, what is driving this work? So the case for math pathways, the problem that we're seeing is mathematics is a barrier to degree completion and equitable outcomes for millions of students. And it shouldn't be a barrier. Mathematics is key to the success in many fields of study out there, in many programs. And so the core mathematics should not be a barrier. So what's driver 1 in this? Your traditional entry-level math programs are not necessarily aligned to the students' mathematical needs. So how often do you hear your students kind of talk about how does this connect with what they're going to do? So it's really looking at your mathematics courses and looking at their programs of study and deciding the math skills that they actually need for that specific program of study. What do they need for criminal justice? What do they need for communication? What do they need for biology? So you're looking at the needs of your students and determining the mathematics pathways that those students would take. And the other driver in this is a long developmental sequence of courses. We know that when you have a long developmental sequence of courses, you have more dropout points. How many students don't want to take math for 4 semesters in a row, or something happens and they cannot complete. So when you have a long developmental sequence, it's going to decrease their chance of completing a credit-bearing course. Now I sent you a link to a prep folder in a UT box, and this article is actually in that folder. So if you would like to read that prior to the workshop, you're more than welcome to read that. So that's placed in the box for you. Now, in Michigan, you have a mathematics task force that's made up of representatives from 2-year and 4-year colleges and universities around the state. And this task force is called the Right Math at the Right Time. So this picture is a picture of the top of the recommendations that the Right Math at the Right Time put out. And if you have not seen this, I have also put this in your Dropbox. So if you want to go back and just kind of refresh on what your co-workers have put out as the recommendations, go in there and look at it. There's some good information in there. And I picked out this one statement here towards the end on one of the recommendations. So your goals in the state of Michigan is to implement strategies that enable students to enroll and complete a college level course more quickly, help them develop skills as learners, employ curriculum design and pedagogy based on proven practice. So what does it sound very familiar, similar to what we just looked at, the DCMP principles? So you as a state have challenged or have a goal of implementing strategies that's going to help students propel in their mathematics courses more quickly, align to their programs of study, and looking at how you're going to support those students as learners, and then also what you're doing in the classroom. So I just want to do a little thought experiment here before we move forward. Again, we've gone around the country and we have seen, we've talked to a lot of people, we've seen a lot of successful programs, and oftentimes we hear people say, well, we have high passing rates in our mathematics courses. So let's assume that we have a 75% passing rate in all of our developmental courses, and your gateway courses. That's actually a really good passing rate. So all the courses in developmental gateway courses have a 75% passing rate. Now, what percentage of your students would actually pass their gateway mathematics course? Because you have to think about your sequence here. So if we look at 2 levels below gateway mathematics, so if we start like at the elementary beginning algebra level, so you have 100% of students that enroll, and with your 75% pass rate of each of those courses, the sequence of courses yields a 42.2% completion rate, passing rate. Well, we know, do all your students actually come back every semester? We would love it, but we know that they don't. So let's say we have a 90% persistence rate at after each of the courses going on to the next course. And that's actually really high too, to have 90% of your students come back the next semester. So if we add in that 90%, our overall success rate for a student who started 2 levels below was around 30.8%. So you can see having these transition points in here and having multiple courses actually yields lower overall success rates or passing rates to the gateway course, or completion, I should say, of the gateway mathematics course. So here's a diagram from CCRC that kind of shares that same information. So these little blue figures here, let's say we have 10 figures that place 3 levels below, need 3 levels of math remediation before they get to their gateway course. So this was a study, and this was published in 2011. I don't know if you can read it at the bottom if you want to actually read the report that this came out of. But this report showed that after 1 semester, you have 5 figures, the blue figures, that successfully completed the course. You have 2 orange that did not complete, and then these 3 white figures, they either did not enroll or stopped enrolling. So if we move on to the next semester, Out of those 5, we now have 2.5 that successfully completed. You have more students that did not complete for whatever reason, and you have more students that just did not enroll or stopped enrolling. So you lost more students. So after your 3rd semester of remediation, you're now up to just 1.5 students successfully completing. And then when they finally get to the gateway course, you only have 1 student out of your original 10 that successfully completed their gateway course. And actually, to be honest, I mean, I know I came from a medium-sized community college in Texas, and 10% is actually really high. We looked at a cohort of data for our students who placed 3 levels below, and we looked at a 3-year period. And at the end of 3 years, we only had 4 of them successfully complete college algebra. At that point, college algebra was really the course for all. So this 10% was actually high, and I've heard similar stories from institutions that I've gone to, but still 10% is a very small number of students successfully completing their courses, and that also means that they're not completing their degrees either. So our work here is, how do we move towards acceleration? How do we take out some of these lost points where students are not coming back or they're stopping enrolling? So that's where acceleration and co-requisites come into play. So I just want you to stop for a second and answer this question, just kind of to yourself, just kind of jot down, or if you have somebody in the room, what acceleration means to you. And actually, let's use the chat box. So go into the chat box and type in, what does acceleration mean to you? And if you're with a group of people, you can kind of quickly discuss it and type something in there. It can just be a quick 1 or 2 words. So getting done faster, accomplishing the same goals in a shorter amount of time, another getting it done faster. The derivative of velocity, love that one. Yeah, I was helping my son with business calculus, and they even have the acceleration and velocity and so forth in his business calculus class. So that's very fresh on my mind and position. Okay, so just basically getting it done faster, accelerating. So I want to share with you how we originally designed our Dana Center Mathematics Pathways courses. So this is a model of acceleration. If you look over here on the left of your screen, you have a Foundations of Mathematical Reasoning course that students would enroll in. So this would be equivalent to basically the beginning or elementary algebra students. So in this course, they learn the mathematics skills that would then allow them to move into any pathway. With this Foundations of Mathematical Reasoning course, they also co-enroll in a Frameworks of Mathematics and Collegiate Learning. So this is more, I would say, closer to a student success course. You're looking, how do you support students as learners? How do you help them research their future career goals? What are your learning theories? Time management. So a lot of those factors were taught in the Frameworks course. Now, some of that content was actually embedded. Some of those support pieces for students were also embedded in the Foundations of Mathematical Reasoning course. So the students during their first semester would take both of these courses together. From there, depending on their program of study, whatever their major was, they could then move into a quantitative reasoning course. They would move into a statistical reasoning course, or they would move into a STEM prep pathway. And this Reasoning with Functions 1 course, this was a college algebra course with embedded intermediate algebra skills. Because from Foundations, most students would not be able to jump straight to like a college algebra course. So during this first semester here, students would take, it was a cohorted model, which we'll talk about terminology in just a minute. But students would take college algebra with the embedded intermediate algebra skills that they needed to be successful. And then the reasoning with functions 2 was basically a pre-calculus course. And then they would move into a calculus sequence. So this is an example of an accelerated model. And actually the college that I came from, we actually used this model. We did away with pre-algebra and we put all students down here in this Foundations of Mathematical Reasoning course. And those students who were really low, we added actually a support course that paired with this to help them so that they would take one developmental course with the Learning Frameworks course, and then they can move into their gateway course. So this is an example of an accelerated model. Another example of an accelerated model, QuantWay and StatWay. So basically the student, when they enroll, would sign up for basically quantitative reasoning if they're a developmental student, and over 2 semesters they would take this quantitative reasoning course that combines the college level content of QR and then the developmental supports. And same thing with statistics. So over 2 semesters they would take statistics with embedded developmental math supports. And what I've seen with the StatWay course, a lot of time, I haven't looked as much into the QuantWay, but the StatWay, a lot of times that first semester was more of your upfront developmental content with the embedded statistics, and then towards the end it was more of the statistics content with the embedded math support. But this is over 2 semesters, so this would take a year, but they would complete their statistics or the quantitative reasoning course in 1 year. So some other acceleration models out there, we've seen just pre-statistics courses followed by a statistics semester. So first semester they would take pre-stats, then they would take statistics, or pre-quantitative reasoning, and then they'd take QR. We've seen accelerated just beginning and intermediate algebra in 1 semester, either by a combined course where they're combining the intermediate and beginning algebra content together. 8-week structure, so maybe the first 8 weeks they would take beginning algebra and the second 8 weeks with intermediate algebra. We've seen Emporium models. And another question up here with others, I know there's lots of other accelerated models. If you are doing a different accelerated model, quickly type that into the chat box. Okay, I can't see on my end. It doesn't look like anybody is typing. Most of the time I can see if somebody's typing, but it's not showing me. Connie, can you see if anybody's typing in there?
Yeah, we just had one pop up about using Alex so that students can work and test out. So, you know, like in addition to an Emporium model, you know, maybe kind of a at the front of the semester or something. I'm assuming maybe that is a boot camp at the end of summer. Maybe letting students remediate on their deficiencies and then test out, or even letting them test out in the middle of a semester. Perhaps I've heard of that quite a bit.
Okay.
Fast track algebra, completing intermediate intro algebra in 1 semester. Yeah. And so the Alex comment, have an addition to that as a 1 credit lab.
So you are really already tackling, some of you are really already tackling this, this notion of acceleration. So what we found, this diagram can actually be found in that Case for Math Pathways document. So what we found is the traditional sequence of students completing within 3 years, roughly 20% of students complete within 3 years. And again, from the college that I came from, and by the way, this isn't just 3 levels down, so let me back up, I was about to say that, but That's a false statement on my part because I was thinking of my 3 levels down. This says traditional developmental to college level completion. This is all students. It's roughly 20%. If you look at those accelerated models that I was just showing you with Statway, and even back then, this is Texas NMP. We used to be New Mathways projects, and now it's the Dana Center Mathematics Pathways because we're not a project anymore. So if we look at that, the passing rates were between roughly 40 and 50% if you look at those accelerated models. But then if we look down here with Tennessee, West Virginia, and Indiana, their success rates were above 60%. So they even had higher success rates with co-requisite initiatives. So there's a description of this in the case of Math Pathways. Like I said, if you want to go back and read that a little bit more. So bringing that term co-requisite into play, again, in the chat box, what does co-requisite mean to you? It actually means different things to different people. It's not as straightforward as you would think. So what does co-requisite mean to you?
We've got just-in-time remediation, class that is required to be taken. Oops, these are coming in fast.
Yeah.
Okay. A class that is required to be taken at the same time as the given class, courses that are designed to be completed at the same time and are supportive of one another, tailored auxiliary support to those who need it, taking a support class along with the class. Students remediate at the same time they prepare to be successful in the credit-bearing class. Support course. I hope I didn't overlook any of those.
I actually saw those popping up at the same time, so I think you covered all of them. So now, when we talk about co-requisites, co-requisite is the course design, but actually if you look at those successes with the co-requisite structures that many of you had noted in the chat box there's a lot more that's happening with implementing co-requisites. There's this comprehensive redesign that's happening at the same time that we've seen around the country. So if we look at Tennessee and West Virginia and Indiana and other successful models, they didn't just implement co-requisites. They implemented these other pieces that you as a state of Michigan have also identified as things that you want to work on with your math task force, your right math at the right time. So looking at your aligned math pathways with default or recommended math courses, or students taking the correct mathematics course for their program of study, having meta majors with default or recommended math requirements. Many times you have students that come in that are undecided, but they kind of have a general idea of the field or the area that they want to go into. So they can look at the meta major, the bigger picture of which programs actually fit into a meta major. And then that kind of helps them define their recommended math requirements. So they're looking at the math recommendations. And on top of that, they're looking at multiple measures placement, which we'll really dig into at the workshop. So you're not just looking at a single test score to put students into a mathematics course. You're looking at multiple measures. You're looking at other factors. And on top of that, you have enhanced advising. So how are you going to help, how's advising going to help those students? And then of course, from what we saw in the other picture, that co-requisite support for those students. So in Tennessee, West Virginia, and Indiana, and other programs, they implemented all of this on top of co-requisite supports for students. Now the question comes up, we hear this again around the country at tons of different places that we go. Do co-requisites work for all students? We have a lot of data from Tennessee. Tristan Denley, who did oversee this work, he was a mathematician, so he pulled figures left and right in all kinds of ways. So that's where we have a majority of our information, overall statistics from Tennessee. We have a lot of individual statistics from colleges, but as a state, we see some good numbers here. So if we look at this diagram here, The bottom represents the ACT scores. And then you have your no ACT down there if you see that maybe those are students who were veterans that didn't need to take the ACT, or maybe there was some other manner they were accepted into the college. So if you look at this, and these were large numbers too, because this was this is full-scale implementation. Overall, there was roughly a 55% passing rate. You'll see this is a little bit different than the other diagram I showed you because this was after full-scale implementation of co-requisites. And if we look at each of the scores, so if somebody scored below a 14, within 1 year, only 2.7% of them ever completed their gateway course in 1 year. And through co-requisites, this jumped to roughly 33%. And if you, again, over here, if you look at the 18, you know, prior to co-requisites, you had 26% of students basically completing a gateway course in 1 semester or 1 year. And then with implementing of CoReqs, that jumped to 80%. So you see huge increases in successful completion of gateway mathematics courses in 1 year through the implementation of co-requisites. Now, this was the community colleges, and the universities also implemented CoReqs. Now, granted, their jumps aren't as large as the community colleges, but there's still significant improvement with the implementation of co-requisites across the whole spectrum, all levels of the ACT test score. Now take a second, look at this diagram. This is from community colleges. So if you look over here on the left, you have the earned hours as percentage of the attempted hours. So how many courses did the students pass, or how many hours, sorry, did they pass out of their attempted hours? And then on the bottom here, you still have your ACT score range. So look at this top line, this orange line. So 52% of students passed both the developmental and the support course and the credit level course. And that was regardless of their ACT score. So 52% of students passed both courses, and they roughly completed, if I look at my vertical axis, between about, I don't know, 85% of all of their hours. And that was the same for the 14, those who scored a 14 over to those who scored an 18. So it did not matter the ACT range. Passing both courses, they were passing a majority of their courses. Now, if we look over here, we had 3% of students that passed only the credit course. So for some reason, they passed the credit course and they failed the developmental course. So if we look here, again, across all of the ACT ranges, it's pretty close. It's pretty similar with the passing rates, percentage of passing of all their hours that they actually took. And this situation, again, you're going to implement on your campus. If you're going to implement CoReqs, you're going to make this work for your institution. But like, for instance, in Texas, if they passed a gateway course and if they failed the developmental portion, they didn't have to go back and take the developmental. They moved forward because it's, you know, once they're deemed college ready, which could be either passing a test or passing a developmental sequence, or even passing the gateway course. If it was co-requisite model, they are deemed college ready. Other places have a little bit more flexibility. They'll make them go back and take both courses, or make them go back and take one of the courses. So that's one of the considerations that you're going to have to decide on your campus. Then if I scroll down here and look at this the blue line, 36% of students failed both courses. They failed the credit course and the support course. Now look though, it did not, again, you would think a lot of people say, well, that's those who scored low on their ACT. It didn't make a difference. It wasn't just the 14s on the ACT. It was very, very similar to the 18s on the ACT. So those students who failed both of their courses, they weren't just failing their mathematics courses. They were failing all of their classes. So this 20%, they were roughly passing 20% of all the classes, all the hours that they enrolled in. So what does this tell us? So regardless of the ACT score, if they pass their their courses, the CoReq courses, they're passing all of their courses. If they fail their CoReq courses, they're failing all of their courses. And so that was actually a diagram from CCA that we adapted. We work closely with CCA on a lot of work, and we share information, research that we receive in the field. So CCA calls this college readiness, a challenge of college readiness, rather than their academic readiness, because it didn't matter their math skills according to a test. And you look at that, I mean, don't you have many students in your that place directly into your credit courses that just aren't ready to be college students? So there's a lot of other factors there when you're looking at those students not passing a course. It's not just a test score. So let's stop here. And I see that's, okay, Connie's been in the chat box answering some questions. Are there any questions in there that were not answered yet? Or Connie, do you want to summarize the one that you did answer?
Yeah, so the basic question was, what course were these graphics about? And this is about all of their Gateway courses, all of their students. But I was just pointing out that, you had talked about the comprehensive redesign with math pathways and meta majors. And so this was a really broad-based design that Tennessee did. It was math pathways, it was meta majors, it was enhanced advising. This is all part of the Tennessee Promise. And the Tennessee Promise is a scholarship program that pays for tuition as long as you keep your grades up. It included all of these things. And so there was also scholarship money attached. And they just put out a report recently about the students who are, the first cohort of students who completed their degrees, showing big gains in degree completion because of the entire Tennessee Promise program. So a big part of it was that they did realign their math requirements, and over 60% of their students take STAT as their requirement. And then it just had a follow-up question about QR. And my answer is that they do have a chunk of students who take QR. I can't remember the percentage, but I will try to find out by next week and bring you that answer, as well as the percentage of students who still are in an algebraic pathway. They will tell you, Indiana will tell you, West Virginia, that if all of those students were still in college algebra, but doing college algebra CoReq, that those numbers would not be so high. That's just worth noting as you think about whether to narrow your focus on designing CoReq and kind of set pathways aside for a bit, then you probably are not going to see those kind of results.
Thank you, Connie.
Sure.
So when we talk about co-requisites, what counts and what does not count? CCA has a blog that I encourage you just to go explore. There's some good information in there. So the link is here. And by the way, I'll provide this PowerPoint after this webinar. I'll put it in that UT Dropbox folder that talks about co-requisites and implementing co-requisites. So the first chapter, they talk about what is a co-requisite course. So to their standards, what is a co-requisite course? What models don't pass the CoReq test? And then this new chapter, meeting the needs of all students. So again, those students who aren't passing the CoReqs, what are the reasons why they're not passing the CoReqs? So meeting the needs of all their students. And they'll continue with these. I was looking at the sequence. I was looking to see if there was another one added, and it's not yet. So you just need to check back periodically to this blog to see when updates come about. Now, when you're designing your co-requisite courses, or your structures of your courses, there's some considerations that you need to take into account for your institution, what's going to work for you. In the UT box, I have uploaded this document, Co-Requisite Supports, that Connie Richardson actually created. And you will see that it is divided into pieces of student structures, calendar structures, placement, and staffing. Again, these are considerations for you to think about. So if we look at just a quick overview, I'm just going to do a quick overview of some terminology, and then I'm actually going to, if you have a chance, get you to jump into the document for a couple minutes. But two terms that you'll hear us use are commingling and cohorting. So we need to have some common vocabulary as we're talking about these models that we're seeing. So if we talk about commingling, what we mean is that we have students that are college ready and not college ready, all embedded in the same course. So you have a mixture of underprepared and prepared students in the same course. Then your underprepared students would then, and I'm sorry, they're red has a negative connotation, instead of did them blue or something, but the underprepared students would then move on and take a support course. So that's what we mean by commingling. So cohorting is when you have like a college level course where all the students are taking a co-requisite course and they're all underprepared. So maybe you're doing some additional supports like embedded, just-in-time supports. Maybe you're front-loading developmental content and the credit course, sort of like the Statway and Quantway, but in one semester. So cohorting is all your students are developmental underprepared. So I'm going to give you just a few minutes, and I'm going to pause here for a second. What's our time here? Okay. Pause here for a second. I want you to actually go to this document, and you can type the tiny URL there. Or even if you don't have the document, you don't have to go to the document to actually see this, because we just went over the definition. So don't worry about going to the document if you don't want to. Over here on the chat box, type in, what are some pros and cons of commingling and cohorting? So Connie, are you in the chat box? Do you want to kind of summarize some of those?
Yes. So that commingling would have study buddies. Cohorting could be perceived as segregation. I think this maybe is referring to commingling, that lower level students may feel intimidated, that it happens in their learning commons, that those students sometimes feel intimidated. With cohorting, everybody would be on the same page. So that's kind of the positive side of that argument. I think that commingling could make you feel bad and cohorting could make you feel good. Everybody's the same. A con of commingling, the underprepared may feel overwhelmed by the students who are more ready. So kind of a different emotion. So there's intimidated and overwhelmed. But then a positive is that commingling could have the potential to raise the level of the underprepared students. Some worries about consistent outcomes across all sections of a course. Sometimes assessment can become relative to the class. So I'm wondering if that is saying that if you were cohorting, you might tend to kind of slow down or reduce expectations or not get as much covered, whereas maybe commingling would encourage it. So I got an exactly, yay. So commingling maybe would do better to keep the level of the class where you wanted it. So those are lots of different perspectives on the two forms. Thanks, everybody.
And I just want to add to, during the workshop, we'll be talking about the rigor in the courses, because oftentimes we hear in co-requisites that what are you actually doing? Are you watering down the courses? And when you're implementing co-requisites, you are not watering down or the purpose is not to water down the courses. Your courses need to stay as rigorous and as they always were, and cover the same content. So that's part of the discussion that you'll be having at the workshop with your teams, because we hear that quite often. Oh, discussion and questions. So that was more discussion and questions, but I guess we kind of covered it there. Well, let's stop. Are there any questions that are, just real quick, any other questions that are coming up right now that you want to cover before we move on to calendar structures?
In case anybody didn't see it, I did remember to go follow up the question about QR in Tennessee by saying that that Indiana does a lot of QR and they don't do a stat path. So we do have evidence of a really strong CoReq for QR in the state of Indiana with Ivy Tech, which is the Indiana Community College System.
And so just with both of those situations, again, I mean, what are the needs of your students and their programs of study, and what's going to work for, statewide, institution, doing your partner communications with your transfer partners. All that's going to come into play with aligning those meta majors and the mathematics courses that the students are going to need to take for their programs of study. So all of that is key to helping students be successful in their mathematics courses and be able to take applicable courses at the community college that would transfer and count actually in the program of study at the university. So that when you're looking at the state of Indiana or the state of Tennessee, a lot of that work was done at the state level, and that's what you're doing in Michigan through your task force. Is you're looking at this, statewide. How can you make it easier for students to move into mathematics pathways that are rigorous and relevant in a quicker manner? It's going to help them move on to to get their degrees and not lose credits. So all that comes into play that you're working on in Michigan and at your institutions. Sorry, little soapbox there, a little side note. So another part of the document is talking about your calendar structures. So we see just-in-time supports, as some of you had typed in the chat box earlier. So this is either support courses that have just-in-time support, maybe embedded supports in the course, or maybe just mandatory tutoring, outside tutoring. We see prerequisite supports plus the college level in one semester. So maybe a boot camp, maybe compressed courses. And then we see like just-in-time supports over 2 semesters. And again, this is looking at the co-requisite courses, because we kind of looked at the accelerated courses earlier. So these are the structures of the co-requisite courses. So I'm clicking my arrow and it's not moving. Let's click again.
Paul, if I could add to that, that something to bear in mind is that we listed all of these because they are options that people use, but in different places, different ones are allowed or not allowed. So in some places, doing an 8-week, for example, is not allowed. And in Texas, what they're talking about right now is that you can do an 8-week, but you can't require the students to pass the first 8 weeks before they move on to the second 8 weeks. But in other places, doing it in doing 8-week, as separate courses is fine. A lot of places wouldn't consider 2 semesters as a CoReq, that a true CoReq student should be able to finish in 1 semester. Whereas other places say 2 semesters is fine. So just bearing that in mind. But since Michigan's not working under a mandate, you have some options. So.
Thank you. So just a little bit of a definition. So your support courses, there's separate courses that are run either before class, after the course, maybe on opposite days, but they're completed within the same semester as the college level course. So we've again, with support courses, we've seen all of these And you'll see models at the workshop too, where some institutions have implemented different models of the support courses. Your embedded supports, the college level content's embedded in the course, and then mandatory tutoring. So maybe you go to your course, your gateway course, and then you have to go to tutoring outside of class for so many hours a week. Maybe it's a structured time, maybe it's unstructured, maybe it's with your instructor, maybe it's with the tutor in the tutoring lab. All of those are considerations for you to think about. So to look at the boot camps, boot camp is maybe like the first 3 to 5 weeks of the semester, the students are taking some remediation. And then after those first 3 to 5 weeks, then they can take the college level course content. Compressed courses, this is what we're talking about, like they're 8-week and 8-week courses. So a little diagram here. So boot camp, what this would look like. So let's say we have a 4-week support course. That since it's 4 weeks, maybe you're meeting 6 hours a week, followed by a 12-week, you could do a commingled, maybe you have a late start statistics course that then includes both those who place directly into statistics and then those who need the addition that were the support students. So that's one idea of a boot camp. Oops, sorry, I got little green guys sitting over there on the side, so forgive them.
You're supposed to be in class. Go to class.
I know. Come on. You also have your 8-week support course followed by an 8-week course. So maybe you have students in the first 8 weeks, they're taking their support course. So maybe that pre-stat course or whatever it is. And then the second semester, they're taking a commingled statistics course. And again, all of that's done within one semester. But you could also have like an 8-week with your students, a support course, followed by, at this time, they're deemed college ready. So at the end of the first 8 weeks, maybe they're deemed college ready already by some means. And then second semester, they're all considered, college ready students because they were deemed college ready. I mean, that's kind of the same picture, but I just kind of wanted to point out that, some people say this is a grade, at the end of this course, they get their grade, they're deemed college ready, so then they can move on to what they needed to. And again, that's within one semester. We've seen the hybrid boot camp. So maybe early on, your underprepared students start off in a support course. And then at the 12-week mark, you have a quantitative reasoning course or college algebra course that begins that everybody can register for. But when this gateway course is happening, your underprepared students are still receiving support in their support course. So this is another option for you to consider. Possible hours, maybe the 16-week support course, you're meeting 3 hours a week, and then your gateway course is a 4-hour a week. Just some different considerations, and you can play with those numbers too, depending on how you set up your courses and then a number of contact hours you have to have for each course. Now, also, we had the just-in-time over 2 semesters, like the stretch course, the StatWay and QuantWay course that we described earlier. Those are considered stretch courses because they happen over 2 semesters. And so what would happen, what this would look like is in the first semester, you have all your underprepared students in the first semester of your statistics course. And then you have a second semester of the statistics course too. What I've seen with structures of this, like for instance, the first semester, they might take, 3 hours of developmental content, like when they're registering, and maybe a 1-hour credit content with registering. And then the second semester with registration, because they have to register each semester, they would maybe take a 1-hour content support course followed by along with a 3-hour content level. So, I mean, the way this looks and how you set this up is different. I mean, you can kind of play with that to fit the needs of your institution. So let's stop here and see if there's any questions that came up. If that spurred any more thoughts or questions. And again, we wanted to kind of do this before the workshop so that you can have some of these thoughts and initial questions that come up happen now and between the workshops, so that when you come to the workshop, you have a clearer picture of just digging into the work and figuring out what's going to happen. Okay, so if there are no questions, we will move on. Another piece to the document is looking at your staffing. Staffing's critical when you're redesigning your courses. You can't redesign your courses if you don't have faculty. How are you going to set up the faculty? Are you going to have a college level instructor teach both the support course and the developmental portion? Are you going to have separate instructors? And if you're going to have separate instructors, what mechanisms are going to be in place that the support course and the developmental instructor and the gateway, the college level instructor are actually communicating and coordinating? So what is this going to look like? We are going to be looking at these staffing at the actual workshop, and you don't have to do this ahead of time, but at the workshop, so that you can actually think about your staffing, we're going to ask you to look at the number of courses that you have this semester, the number of students, the number of instructors, and kind of think about some initial thoughts. If you have time and you can do this, this document is uploaded into the Dropbox. If possible, fill this out because it's going to help you and your team dig immediately into the work. This document, you're looking at your staffing, but you're also looking at maybe your test scores of your students. And you can I randomly put some ACT scores on the document when you're trying to figure out how many students are placed. And I'm sorry, I don't have a diagram of that. I should have put that diagram in there. But, we ask you how many students place at each level in their ACT. So like your IR person can pull that. Maybe we see some places where their college ready is deemed, their students are deemed college ready at a 19 on the ACT, or other places it's a 22 on the ACT. So again, this is nothing you're turning in. It's just a tool to be helpful for your workshop. So make sure for your team at the workshop, so you can kind of alter it to fit your needs. But if possible, just fill this out as much as you can. And then one of our activities at the workshop is we're going to be looking at staffing and those other considerations as well, and looking at models. So we're actually ahead of time. We're at the end of the webinar. So you're going to get some time blessed back to your day, which we all like. So what other questions or discussions do you want to have right now before the workshop, or what are some things you want us to consider and answer at the workshop? So if you have some questions even that you don't want answered right now that you just want us to tackle at the workshop, we can do our best to research that, and we won't have the answers to everything, of course, but we'll do our best to research and bring to you what we do know.
We had a couple of questions come in, Paula. One of them was about doing CoReq with the STEM path and success rates and that sort of thing. And so I will say that we'll have a lot of very specific examples at the workshop, but just in general, I would say that most of the institutions we've talked to have gone with the cohort model for their STEM path courses. So you don't have to choose one model for every pathway. And so they've found great success in QR and STAT doing a commingled model. But a lot of places have had difficulty with the STEM path commingle. And so they've gone with a cohort. Part of the reason, or part of maybe the distinguishing characteristic for some people, is it depends on how broad of a placement you're using. So if you're really trying to dip down and get a whole bunch of students from across your placement band, then so you've got students who normally would have taken 2 levels of developmental, and you're trying to put them in a commingled college algebra class, they just don't have the algebra background in order to be able to be successful. So doing a commingled model, meeting 6 or 7 hours a week, really front loading a lot of the development. Did I say commingled? Cohort model, 6-7 hours a week, front loading a lot of the developmental content. Then they're able to be successful with those students. But if they are but people who have done a commingle and had success with it, it's generally because they're not grabbing that many students. They're taking basically their intermediate algebra and college algebra students and putting them together and doing a commingled model, and sometimes even just like the upper band of their intermediate students. So that's something to think about. And then also a question about if you're condensing to do that kind of late start, then the college ready students who are starting late, is it a hardship on them to have a shorter semester? But they're getting more hours per week. So it's similar to like a summer session or whatever at that point, where they have more hours per week in fewer weeks. And so, I always thought it was crazy how students could be successful in summer school, but they are. And the evidence shows that they'll be okay. It always surprised me how students could fail a math class 3 times and then take it in the summer and do well. So for some students it works. So.
Yeah, I know that before the co-requisite movement came on, a big push was students in 8-week courses, 8-week. The success rates were a lot higher in 8-week courses, beyond, instead of the 16-week course. A lot of institutions are actually already moving to 8-week models before the CoReq work started coming into place. So CoReq just takes out that transition point and gets them that there's still the same amount of contact hours that Connie, stated. So there is a lot of evidence that students are successful in accelerated models. I know sometimes it's, like Connie said, it's sometimes hard to figure out why, but they're getting the math pretty much every day to stay on top of it. I mean, it would take less of their other courses. Their focus would be their math and fewer other courses. So they're more focused just on that.
Yeah, if you're taking 6 hours of math in a semester, right, exactly. You're going to focus on it. You're only going to have 1 or 2 other classes, 1, 2, or 3 other classes, and in summer school, you probably only take the 1. So that is true. Yeah. So we do have a comment about focusing on how to better support programs as they decide which pathway is a best fit for the program. So I will say that during our 2 days next week, we'll have a lot of time where you're working on with your team to decide what is the best fit, or project what you think will be the best fit. But it'll be interspersed with periods where we're kind of layering on additional information, additional considerations, and talking about that continuous improvement cycle. So it is really important to think about that if you're not super happy at the end of the first year of your program, to think about it as how do we work to continuously improve it, rather than thinking of it as an indictment on CoReq, and just figure out what tweaks need to be made in order to improve those results. And also, so we hope we have some tools and resources that will support you as you do that work. And then, let us know what you find lacking that we can help you with.
Yes, and if you have materials that you're already using, like sample syllabi, if you're already doing CoReqs, because from my understanding, there are institutions in Michigan that are dabbling in co-requisites. So anything that you can bring and share in that Dropbox, if you can, I'll create a folder where you can upload and share materials. That would be helpful to your peer institutions across the state. And then also talking about pathways, I saw one last comment about pathways. Your math task force, the right math at the right time, is actually tackling one of that right there that you're talking about. How are you going to figure out the mathematics course for each program of study? So they will actually they are diving into that to help those conversations with partner disciplines and mathematics faculty to help make those conversations and decide what's the best pathway. And I can also share, I have a webinar that I created, like multidisciplinary discussions, where you can, on your campus, you can have those conversations with maybe your criminal justice department or your psychology department or something, if you would just want to have your own campus conversation. So I can share a link to that webinar too, and some resources to see if that would be helpful. Yes, and I'll put the slides when we're finished here. When the recording finishes on my computer, I'll upload the recording, and I'll also upload a PDF of the slides for you. So I guess that is it, and we will see you next week in Michigan, and we'll make sure to bring our raincoats and our jackets and the other advice you gave us at the beginning of the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you there. And this, like I said, this is going to be made as a recording, so you can go back and go over it again or share it or whatever you need to. That's it. Just for the workshop in general, if you have any questions about the workshop, you can contact me. If you have any logistics questions, you may contact Jenny Shanker at the Michigan Center for Student Success. And again, these slides will be in there, so you'll have our emails. So have a great day, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank y'all for participating.
Thanks so much.